The red sun hung low over the broken city of Velmora, casting twisted shadows through the ruins where millions once lived. Deep underground, in tunnels that smelled of fear and desperation, the last 3,000 Velthari pressed together. In the darkness, Minho crouched beside his dying sister, her silver skin growing pale as the neural parasites the Scarthul had implanted slowly drained her life force. She was only 16 cycles old, barely an adult by Velthari standards, but her large violet eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen too much death. "The harvesters will come again tomorrow," whispered Elder Suyan from across the cavern. Her voice carried through their telepathic network, touching every mind in their underground sanctuary. "They need our brain tissue for their machines. We are nothing but cattle to them now." Minho felt his sister's weak mental touch against his mind. "Brother, do you remember when we could speak to the stars? When our thoughts could reach across space to other worlds?" He squeezed her frail hand. "I remember, G1. Before the Scarthul came, before they built their blocking towers, our people could talk to anyone in the galaxy." "The galaxy doesn't care about us anymore," said Dayun, a young warrior who had lost his entire family in the last harvest. His mental voice was bitter with anger. "The big powers made their deal with the Scarthul. They trade our lives for peace in their sectors." Elder Suyan's ancient mind touched each of theirs with gentle sadness. "The Confederation of Worlds called us acceptable losses when they signed the treaty. Too peaceful to be useful allies, too weak to matter in their wars." Above them, the ground shook as massive ships landed on the planet's surface. The Scarthul were preparing for another harvest. Their biomechanical bodies needed constant upgrades, and Velthari neural tissue was the finest enhancement material in the known galaxy. Each harvest meant hundreds of their people would be taken, their minds extracted while they were still alive. "Remember how beautiful our cities were?" Jiwan's voice was getting weaker. "The crystal spires that sang in the wind, the gardens that bloomed with our thoughts, the art galleries where visitors from 100 worlds came to see our creations." Minho closed his eyes, trying to hold on to those memories. The Velthari had been known throughout the galaxy as artists, philosophers, and healers. Their music could cure madness, their paintings could show the future, and their poetry had ended wars between distant species. All of that was gone now. "They came so fast," said Kuna, an elderly teacher who had once instructed diplomats from across the galaxy. The Scarthul fleet appeared without warning. No declaration of war, no demands. They just started taking our people. The first raids had been surgical, precise. The Scarthul had studied their prey well. They destroyed the communication centers first, cutting off any calls for help. Then they eliminated the government, the military leaders, anyone who might organize resistance. The Velthari, who had not fought a war in over 1,000 years, were helpless against an enemy that treated violence as an art form. "We sent messages to our allies," Elder Suyan continued, her mind heavy with old grief. "The Altarian Republic, the Centauri Coalition, even the human territories. They all said the same thing. We cannot interfere with Scarthul internal affairs." Internal affairs. That was what the galaxy called genocide now. The Scarthul had claimed Velthari space as their own, and the major powers had accepted it rather than risk a war. Better to sacrifice one small species than upset the balance of power. Minho felt his sister's breathing grow shallow. Around them, others were dying too. Starvation, disease, and despair were finishing what the harvesters had started. In another generation, there would be no Velthari left to remember their civilization. "I can feel them coming," whispered Hana, a young mother holding her infant child. "The harvesters, they're moving through the upper tunnels." The familiar sound of mechanical legs clicking against stone echoed from above. The Scarthul harvester units were spider-like creatures, part biological, part machine, designed specifically for hunting telepathic species. Their neural scanners could detect Velthari thoughts from kilometers away. Elder Suyan struggled to her feet, her aged body trembling with effort. "If this is our end, then let us try one last time. Let us send our voices into the dark between stars. Perhaps someone, somewhere, will hear us and remember that we existed." Every surviving Velthari in the tunnel joined their minds together, their combined telepathic power reaching out desperately into space. They sent their history, their culture, their pain, and their hope into the vast emptiness, not knowing if anyone would listen. The message traveled faster than light, crossing the galaxy in moments. It carried the story of a peaceful people destroyed by greed, of a civilization that had given beauty to the universe only to be consumed by those who valued power over art. As the harvesters broke through the tunnel walls and began their grim work, the Velthari continued to send their final song into the darkness, hoping that somewhere among the distant stars, someone might care enough to remember them. In the cold space between worlds, their desperate cry echoed through the void, seeking any heart that might still believe in justice. Dr. Suman was alone in her research lab on Luna Station when the telepathic wave hit her like a physical blow. She fell from her chair, crying out as alien thoughts flooded her mind. Images of silver-skinned beings, crystal cities burning, and creatures being dragged away screaming filled her consciousness. The sensitive equipment around her lab went crazy, alarms blaring as readings spiked beyond anything she had ever recorded. Her assistant Jinwoo came running from the next room, finding her on the floor with tears streaming down her face. "Dr. Suman, what happened? The machines are going insane." She struggled to sit up, her head pounding from the intensity of what she had experienced. "Contact Director Bayom immediately, and get Commander Nari from the Defense Corps. Tell them it's an emergency." Within an hour, her small lab was crowded with officials. Director Bayom studied the readings with deep concern, while Commander Nari paced nervously by the window that looked out at Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. "It's definitely alien," Suman explained, her voice still shaky. "The telepathic signature is unlike anything in our databases. The emotional content was overwhelming. Pure desperation, terror, and something else. Love, I think. Love for their people, their culture." "Where did it come from?" asked Commander Nari. "The Kethmara system. It's controlled by the Skarthul hegemony now." Suman pulled up a star chart on her main screen. The signal was so strong it reached across nearly half the galaxy. That means either they have incredible telepathic abilities or this was their absolute last effort. Director Bayom frowned at the data. The Skarthul conquered that system 6 months ago. Intelligence reports suggested they were harvesting the local population for biological materials. "Harvesting?" Jinwoo looked sick. "You mean they're killing them?" "Worse," Commander Nari said quietly. "The Skarthul use living neural tissue to enhance their cybernetic implants. They need their victims to be alive during the extraction process." The room fell silent as the horrible truth sank in. Somewhere across the galaxy, an entire species was being slowly tortured to death, and their final scream for help had somehow reached Earth. "We have to do something," Suman said, though her voice lacked conviction. Everyone in the room knew how small and weak humanity was compared to the great galactic powers. "Do what?" Commander Nari spread her hands helplessly. "We have maybe 50 combat ships in our entire fleet. The Skarthul hegemony controls hundreds of star systems. They have thousands of warships." "The major powers won't help," Director Bayom added. "They've already signed treaties with the Skarthul. No one wants to start a war over one small species." Suman stared at the readings again, remembering the overwhelming emotion she had felt. The love, the hope, the desperate belief that someone, somewhere, would care enough to help. She thought about her own daughter, safe in school on Earth, and imagined how she would feel if aliens came to harvest human children. "I need to speak with Admiral Tajan," she said suddenly. Commander Nari shook her head. "Suman, you can't be serious. We're talking about challenging one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. With what? We don't have superweapons or massive fleets. What do we have that could possibly make a difference?" Suman was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she looked up at her colleagues with a strange light in her eyes. "We have something they don't expect. We're human." 2 days later, she stood in Admiral Tajan's office at Terra Command, the planet Earth visible through the massive windows behind his desk. The Admiral was a stern woman in her 60s, with gray hair and scars from the colony wars 20 years earlier. "Let me understand this correctly, Doctor," Admiral Tajan said. "You want me to send our entire fleet to attack the Scarthul hegemony because you received a telepathic distress call from aliens we've never met?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you believe we can succeed where the combined military might of the Confederation of Worlds chooses not to even try?" "Yes, ma'am." Admiral Tajan was quiet for a long time, studying the young scientist. "Why?" "Because someone has to," Suman said simply. "Because it's right. Because if we don't, an entire species dies, and we become the kind of people who let genocide happen because it's inconvenient to stop it." The Admiral turned to look out at Earth, thinking of humanity's own history. The wars, the struggles, the times when they had been the underdogs fighting impossible odds. "You know we'll probably all die, don't you?" "Maybe. But maybe we won't. Humans have a talent for surviving things that should kill us. And we have something the Scarthul don't understand." "What's that?" "We're too stupid to know when we're beaten." Suman smiled grimly. "And we really hate bullies." Admiral Tajan was quiet for another minute. Then she reached for her communication device. "Get me the fleet commanders. All of them. We're going to do something very stupid and very necessary. Within hours." Every human warship in the solar system was preparing for departure. The odds were hopeless, the mission was suicide, and not one captain asked to be left behind. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Admiral Tajan sent a message back toward the Kethmara system, hoping the surviving aliens could somehow receive it. "This is the Terran fleet. We heard your call. We're coming." Captain Hyunwoo stared at the massive Scarthul harvester ships through his bridge viewport, his hands gripping the command chair so tightly his knuckles were white. 12 human ships against a fleet of 60 alien warships. The numbers made no sense, but here they were anyway. "Sir, we're receiving a telepathic transmission," reported Communications Officer Yuna. "It's the aliens down on the planet. They're trying to talk to us." Hyunwoo nodded to Dr. Suman, who had insisted on coming with the fleet. She activated the telepathic translator, and suddenly alien voices filled their minds. The sensation was strange and wonderful, like hearing music made of thoughts. "You came," whispered a voice full of wonder. "Even though you do not know us, you came to help." "That's what humans do," Hyunwoo replied through the translator. "We show up when people need help." The alien voice, which belonged to Elder Su-Yan, was filled with gratitude and amazement. "The Scarthul have powerful shields and weapons. How will you fight them?" Hyunwoo smiled grimly. "We're not going to fight them the way they expect." The Scarthul fleet was arranged in perfect military formation, exactly as their training manuals required. Their ships were massive, heavily armed, and designed to crush enemies through superior firepower. They had conquered dozens of worlds using the same tactics every time. But the human ships scattered like leaves in the wind, diving toward the planet's surface and disappearing into the atmosphere. The Scarthul commander, General Vextar, watched, in confusion from his flagship. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "Why don't they engage us in proper space combat?" His tactical officer studied the readings. "They appear to be using the planet's magnetic field to hide their ships, sir. Our sensors cannot track them accurately." "Impossible. No species is primitive enough to use planetary interference as a military tactic." Down on Kethmara's surface, the human ships skimmed low over the ruined cities, using the wreckage to mask their movements. Lieutenant Yujin piloted her fighter through the crystal ruins, guided by telepathic voices that showed her exactly where the enemy ships were most vulnerable. "There," whispered a Velthari survivor named Minho. "The command ship has weak armor near its communication array. If you can disable that, their coordination will suffer." Yujin banked her fighter sharply, weaving between the massive legs of a Scarthul harvester. The enemy's weapons were designed for space combat, too large and slow to track a small ship moving at high speed through debris. Above the atmosphere, General Vexitar grew increasingly frustrated. "Send down ground forces, find these humans and destroy them." But when the Scarthul troops landed, they found themselves fighting an enemy unlike any they had encountered. The humans didn't hold territory or fight from fixed positions. They struck fast and disappeared, always attacking where the enemy was weakest. Sergeant Junho led a squad of human marines through the underground tunnels where the Velthari had been hiding. With him were several of the silver-skinned aliens, their large eyes glowing softly in the darkness. "The harvesters are coming from the north," whispered a young Velthari named Jiwon, her thoughts clear in his mind. 6 of them, moving through the old subway tunnels. Junho signaled his team to take positions. When the mechanical spider creatures rounded the corner, they walked straight into a trap. The humans had learned to use the Scarthul's own technology against them, turning their neural scanners into explosive devices. The Scarthul had ruled through fear and superior technology for centuries. They had never faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated, that turned every disadvantage into an advantage. "Sir," reported the tactical officer to General Vextar, "we've lost contact with 7 command ships. The humans appear to be boarding our vessels and sabotaging them from within. How are they getting past our security?" "They're different, sir. Our telepathic scanners cannot read human minds the way they read other species. They're immune to our standard detection methods." On the bridge of the Scarthul flagship, Corporal Seojin crept through the shadows, his team of Marines following. Behind him, the aliens had designed their ships for their own biology, with passages too narrow for their mechanical bodies, but perfect for humans. "Remember," he whispered to his team, "we're not here to fight them all. We just need to plant the virus in their main computer." The Scarthul depended completely on their technology for coordination. Their society was built on rigid hierarchy, with every decision coming from the top. If the humans could disrupt their communications, the entire fleet would be paralyzed. Seojin reached the main computer core and plugged in the device Dr. Suman had designed. It was a simple program, but devastating to a species that had never learned to think for themselves. The virus spread through the Scarthul network like wildfire, filling their communications with telepathic feedback from the dying Velthari. For the first time in their history, ordinary Scarthul soldiers began to feel the terror and pain of their victims. The rigid discipline that held their society together started to crack. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice was panicked. "Our fleet is breaking formation. Individual ships they're questioning orders, sir. Some are refusing to fire on civilian targets." General Vexitar stared in disbelief as his perfect military machine began to fall apart. These humans had done something impossible. They had made his own soldiers think for themselves. Down on the planet, Captain Hyunwoo watched Scarthul ships beginning to retreat, their crews in chaos. "How did you know that would work?" asked Elder Suyeon, her telepathic voice filled with wonder. Hyunwoo smiled. "Because every bully is the same. They're only strong when everyone's afraid of them." News of the human fleet's attack on the Scarthul spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. In the halls of the Confederation of Worlds, diplomats stared at their screens in shock. The tiny human species, barely 50 years into space travel, had dared to challenge one of the most feared empires in known space. Ambassador Keelix of the Altarian Republic shook his blue-scaled head in disbelief. "Have the humans lost their minds? The Scarthul will crush them like insects." "Perhaps that was their plan all along," suggested Ambassador Yorth from the Centauri Coalition. "Humans are known to be unstable. Maybe they prefer to die fighting rather than live in shame." Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Scarthul response was swift and terrible. Supreme Commander Thakmor, ruler of the hegemony, stood on the bridge of his massive dreadnought, his mechanical body humming with rage. "How many ships do we have in the region?" he demanded. 300 warships, Supreme Commander, our largest battle fleet. Send them all to Kethmara. I want every human ship destroyed, every human world marked for conquest. We will make such an example of them that no species will ever dare to challenge us again." Back at Kethmara, Admiral Tajin received the intelligence report with grim acceptance. Her small fleet had managed to save thousands of Velthari civilians, but now they faced total annihilation. 300 ships, she said quietly, standing on the bridge of her flagship. "We have 12 left after the battle." Captain Hyunwoo, his uniform torn and bloodied from the ground fighting, shook his head. We knew this was a one-way trip when we came here. At least we saved some of them. But Communications Officer Yuna looked up from her station with tears in her eyes. Admiral, we're receiving a message from Earth. It's being broadcast on all frequencies to every human ship and colony in known space. Admiral Tajin nodded grimly. Put it through. Let's hear our funeral speech. The message that filled the bridge was not what they expected. Instead of orders to retreat or apologies to the galaxy, it was a simple recording from Dr. Suman, transmitted from Luna Station just hours before. People of Earth, colonies of humanity, ships in the void between stars. We found a species being murdered. They called for help and we answered. Now we're probably going to die for it, but someone had to try. If you're listening to this, remember that we didn't die for nothing. We died because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than staying safe. The message included all the data from Kethmara, the telepathic recordings of Velthari suffering, the evidence of genocide that the galaxy had chosen to ignore. It showed the gentle silver-skinned beings, their art, their music, their children, being dragged away by mechanical monsters. On Earth, the response was immediate. In Seoul, factory worker Min-jae watched the broadcast in his apartment, then looked at his young son sleeping peacefully in the next room. He thought about alien children being harvested for their brains, and anger filled his chest like fire. Going, he told his wife Yuna when she came home from work. Going where? To help them. The transport companies are looking for volunteers. They're turning cargo ships into warships. Yuna stared at him. You could die. I could live knowing. I did nothing while children were murdered. He kissed her forehead gently. Take care of our boy. Tell him his father went to help some people who needed it. Across the solar system, the same scene played out millions of times. On Mars colony, mining supervisor Wu Jin left his job to pilot a converted ore hauler. On Europa Station, merchant captain Sun Hee loaded her luxury liner with volunteers instead of passengers. This is crazy, her first officer protested. We're not soldiers. We're not warriors. We carry tourists and business people. Today we carry hope, Sun Hee replied, programming the navigation computer for Kethmara. Even the pirates joined in. Captain Ryuji, who had spent 10 years robbing merchant ships, heard the call and felt something stir in his black heart. Boys, he announced to his crew, we're going legitimate, just for a while. The fleet that assembled was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Cargo haulers with mining lasers welded to their hulls, passenger liners loaded with combat volunteers, racing ships carrying medical supplies. Even ancient colony ships that hadn't moved in decades were dragged out of mothballs and crewed by elderly veterans who remembered Earth's darker days. Captain Minsu, commanding a converted research vessel, sent a message to his teenage daughter back on Earth. Honey, remember what I taught you about bullies? Sometimes you have to stand up to them, even when you're scared. Daddy's going to stand up to some very big bullies right now. The makeshift armada numbered over 200 ships by the time it reached the edge of the solar system. Not warships, not military vessels, just ordinary humans who had decided that genocide was unacceptable, regardless of the cost. Admiral Tajin received word of the approaching fleet while preparing for her final battle. She stared at the communication, in amazement. Sir, reported her tactical officer, the approaching ships are broadcasting a simple message on repeat. What does it say? Earth remembers. Earth cares. Earth comes. For the first time since arriving at Kethmara, Admiral Tajin smiled. Humanity might not have the biggest ships or the best weapons, but they had something the galaxy had forgotten. They showed up when it mattered. The space above Kethmara became a graveyard of metal and light as the final battle began. 300 Scarthul warships faced off against 200 human vessels that had no business being in a war zone. Cargo haulers stood alongside luxury liners, mining ships next to racing yachts, all united by the simple human belief that some things were worth dying for. Admiral Tajin watched from her flagship as the enemy fleet approached in perfect formation, their massive dreadnoughts bristling with enough firepower to destroy planets. Her own fleet looked like a collection of toys in comparison. "All ships, this is Admiral Tajan," she broadcast to the human fleet. "I won't lie to you. Most of us are going to die today. But we're going to make it count." Captain Sunhee, commanding her converted passenger liner, smiled grimly as she spoke to her crew of volunteers. "Remember, we're not trying to win a traditional battle. We're trying to break their spirit." The Scarthul Supreme Commander Thakmor expected the humans to fight like every other species, forming battle lines and trading shots until the weaker force was destroyed. Instead, the human ships scattered in all directions, moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. "What are they doing?" he demanded from his command ship. His tactical officer studied the displays in confusion. "They appear to be attacking our supply lines, sir, and our communication relays. Some are ramming our smaller vessels." "Ramming? That's suicide." "Yes, sir. They seem to be willing to die to take out our ships." Engineer Minjay, aboard a converted mining vessel, worked frantically to modify their industrial equipment. "If we can turn these plasma cutters into weapons, we might be able to slice through their armor," he told his crew of factory workers and mechanics. They approached a Scarthul cruiser from below, using the ship's own bulk to hide their approach. When they emerged, they cut through the enemy vessel's hull like it was made of paper, then flew through the gap they had created. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Captain Ryuji, the reformed pirate, used his knowledge of illegal modifications to turn his ship's cargo bay into a massive bomb. He flew straight at a Scarthul dreadnought, ejecting the explosive cargo at the last moment before pulling away. The Scarthul had never faced an enemy like this. Their rigid military training had prepared them for conventional warfare, not for opponents who treated their own lives as weapons. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, his voice shaking, "we're receiving telepathic transmissions from the planet. The surviving aliens they're coordinating with the human ship somehow. Down on Kethmara's surface, Elder Suyon and the remaining Velthari had emerged from their hiding places. Their telepathic abilities, combined with human tactical thinking, created a coordination system the Scarthul couldn't understand or counter. The command ship is turning to port," Suyon whispered telepathically to Captain Woojin. "Its shield generator is exposed for exactly 12 seconds. Woojin, piloting his converted ore hauler, adjusted course and fired his mining lasers at exactly the right moment. The Scarthul ship's shields flickered and died, leaving it vulnerable to attack from other human vessels. But the human ships were dying too. For every Scarthul vessel destroyed, 2 or 3 human ships were lost. The luxury liner commanded. By sun he took a direct hit from a dreadnought's main gun, her ship breaking apart as she tried to protect a transport full of rescued Velthari civilians. "Tell my daughter I love her," she whispered into her communicator as her bridge filled with fire. The battle raged for 18 hours. Space around Kethamara became filled with debris from both fleets, the wreckage of dreams and ambitions mixing with the twisted metal of war machines. The turning point came when engineer Seojin, working with a team of Velthari telepaths, managed to hack into the Scarthul communication network one final time. Instead of just disrupting their signals, they broadcast something that shattered the enemy's will to fight. They transmitted the dying thoughts of every Scarthul soldier killed in the battle, along with the telepathic cries of every Velthari victim who had been harvested. For the first time in their species' history, ordinary Scarthul warriors felt the full weight of what they had done. "Make it stop," screamed a Scarthul gunner, his mechanical body shaking as alien emotions flooded his mind. "I can feel them, dying. I can feel their children crying." Across the enemy fleet, the rigid discipline that held their society together crumbled. Soldiers refused orders, officers abandoned their posts, and entire ships simply stopped fighting as their crews were overwhelmed by guilt and horror. Supreme Commander Thakmor watched his perfect military machine fall apart around him. "Retreat," he finally ordered. "All ships retreat." The surviving Scarthul vessels fled in panic, their empire's reputation shattered forever. The species that had conquered through fear and intimidation had been broken by an enemy that refused to be afraid. When the battle ended, less than 50 human ships remained functional. Thousands of brave people had died to save a species they had barely known existed. But the Velthari were free, and the galaxy had learned something important about humanity. 2 years later, Admiral Tyjan stood beside Elder Suyon at the launch of the colony ship New Hope. The vessel, built jointly by human and Velthari engineers, would carry both species to unexplored space where they could build something beautiful together. "Why did your people come for us?" Suyon asked, her telepathic voice filled with eternal gratitude. Admiral Tyjan looked up at the stars, thinking of all the brave souls who had died to make this moment possible. Because someone had to. Because it was right. Because that's what humans do when we see someone who needs help. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had proven that sometimes the smallest voice, raised in defiance of injustice, could echo across the stars and change everything.